From the moment I was old enough to understand what love felt like, I also understood what it meant to live without it. My name is Sophia Evans, and I am the unwanted child of my family. My younger brother Jacob was the golden child, adored, praised, and given everything he ever wanted. But I was just there. I used to have a room of my own, a small cozy space with pale blue walls, a bookshelf filled with secondhand novels, and a creaky wooden bed that groaned whenever I moved. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was the one place in the house where I felt like I belonged, until the day my parents decided I didn't need it anymore. I was 16 years old when my mother and father told me I would be moving into the attic. Not because we had relatives moving in, not because they needed my room for something important. No, because Jacob wanted a gaming room. I remember the day clearly, the way my mother avoided my eyes, how my father spoke with the detached tone of someone announcing the weather. "We've been thinking, Sophia," my mother said, stirring her tea as if this was the most normal conversation in the world. "You don't really need your bedroom, do you?" I stared at her, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "What?" My father sighed, setting down his newspaper. "Your brother is getting older and he needs his own space. He's outgrown sharing a room with all his things, and honestly, it makes sense for him to have more room." Jacob, who was 14 at the time, smirked at me from across the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He already knew this decision had been made, and he was just waiting for me to accept it. "But," I swallowed hard, "where am I supposed to sleep?" Mom smiled as if she was generously solving my problem. "Oh, the attic, of course. We'll clean it out for you. It'll be cozy." Cozy? The attic was filthy. A dark, cramped space filled with old furniture, dust, and forgotten junk. It didn't even have proper insulation, just exposed wooden beams and a single tiny window that barely let in any light. I looked at Jacob. He was already grinning, picturing the massive gaming setup he would have. I turned back to my parents. "You're giving my room to Jacob? Just like that?" My father's face hardened. "Don't be selfish, Sophia. It's just a room. You'll still have a place to sleep." I knew then that arguing wouldn't help. It never did, so I just nodded, and I lost the last thing that was ever mine. The very next weekend, they started moving my things out. Not gently, not carefully. My bookshelf, tossed into the garage. My bed, replaced with storage boxes before I even had a chance to pack. My posters, my childhood stuffed animals, my drawings, gone. By the end of the day, it wasn't my room anymore. It was Jacob's. And as if to make it even worse, they spared no expense in transforming it. They painted the walls a sleek black and blue, installed LED lights that changed colors on command, bought him the latest gaming PC, a widescreen monitor, and a state-of-the-art gaming chair, a brand new entertainment system, high-speed internet, shelves lined with games and accessories I had never been allowed to have. They never spent that kind of money on me. I had asked for art supplies once. My mother told me they were too expensive. Jacob got a full gaming room renovation and no one batted an eye. They told me I would get used to the attic, but I never did. It was cold in the winter, unbearably hot in the summer. The dim yellow light bulb flickered, barely illuminating the space. The floor creaked under my weight, and I was constantly afraid I would fall through the old wooden boards. At night, I lay on the thin mattress they had given me, listening to Jacob laughing downstairs in my old room, playing games on his expensive setup. And my parents? They never checked on me, never asked if I was comfortable, never cared. I had been removed from the home, pushed out of sight, out of mind, and for the first time I realized something devastating. They had never wanted me there in the first place. I started withdrawing, stopped talking at dinner, stopped asking for things. I even stopped coming downstairs unless I had to. No one noticed. Jacob thrived in his new gaming paradise. My parents adored him, praising him every time he won a match, watching proudly as he showed off his high scores. Me? I faded into the background. Until one night, I overheard them talking. "She's being dramatic," my mother scoffed. "It's just a room." "She should be grateful she even has a place to sleep," my father added. Grateful? Grateful for being shoved into an attic while my brother was rewarded for doing nothing? I clenched my fists under the covers, my heart pounding. I wasn't angry anymore. I was hurt. They hadn't just taken my room. They had taken my place in the family, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive them for it. I didn't know it at the time, but losing my room was just the beginning. The beginning of me realizing how little I meant to them. The beginning of something darker, because as much as I tried to endure it, to accept my place in the shadows, one day they would make it crystal clear. I was never meant to be part of their family at all, and I would never forget it. Living in the attic changed something in me. I stopped trying to be noticed, stopped trying to be loved. If they wanted to ignore me, fine. I would ignore them too. But no matter how hard I tried to fade into the background, the reality of my situation was impossible to escape. I was invisible. Jacob thrived in his gaming room. My parents adored him, showering him with praise every time he achieved something as trivial as a new high score. Meanwhile, my achievements meant nothing. When I got an A on my English paper, silence. When I was accepted into an honors program, barely a nod. When I won an art competition at school, my mother laughed and said, "Well, that won't get you a real job." I stopped telling them things, because what was the point? It wasn't until Christmas that I realized just how deep the favoritism ran. That morning I came downstairs to see the living room overflowing with gifts for Jacob. Gaming accessories, new sneakers, an expensive jacket, even a brand new phone. I looked at my small pile, my heart sinking. A cheap notebook from the dollar store, a pair of socks, and a used sweater with the tag still attached from a secondhand shop. I clenched my fists. I hadn't expected much. But this was them not even trying to hide it anymore. Jacob unwrapped his gifts with glee, my parents laughing and encouraging him. When he reached the last present, a PS5, the newest gaming console at the time, he screamed in excitement. "Thank you! Thank you! This is the best Christmas ever!" He ran over and hugged our parents. I just sat there, my unopened notebook in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't even say anything. I just felt empty. A few months later, something happened that I could never forgive. I came home from school one day and noticed something strange. My art supplies, the few things I had left, were gone from the attic. Panicked, I ran downstairs. "Mom, where are my sketchbooks?" She barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, those? We needed more space in the attic for storage, so I threw them out." My blood ran cold. "You what?" My father sighed. "Relax, Sophia. They were just a bunch of drawings. It's not like they were important." Not important. The one thing that brought me peace. The one thing that made me feel like I mattered. Gone. I turned to Jacob, who was sitting in my old room completely unfazed. He didn't even look at me. I felt something inside me break, and I knew, in that moment, that I would never forgive them. I spent the next 2 years planning my way out. I worked part-time after school, saving every penny I could. I told no one. When college applications opened, I applied out of state. My parents didn't even notice. Then, on my 18th birthday, something happened that confirmed I was making the right choice. I came home and found that the attic, the one I had been forced into, was now filled with old furniture and storage boxes. They had completely moved my things out, and when I asked why, my mother shrugged. "Well, you'll be leaving for college soon anyway, right?" She hadn't even asked where I was going. She hadn't even cared. And that's when I knew I wasn't part of this family. Not really, and I never had been. On the day I left for college, I didn't tell them goodbye. I packed my things quietly. No one noticed. No one asked where I was going. As I walked out the door, I looked back one last time. Jacob was in his gaming room, laughing with his friends. My parents were watching TV, not even glancing in my direction. I stepped outside, and I never looked back. I thought leaving would be the hardest part. I thought once I was free, I could start over. But I was wrong, because years later, when everything in my life was finally falling into place, I got a phone call from my mother, and what she said made my blood run cold. "Sophia, we need your help." And for the first time in my life, I had to decide. Would I go back, or would I finally let them go? After that Christmas night, everything changed, not for my parents, but for me. I stopped hoping they would suddenly treat me better. I stopped waiting for them to realize how unfair they had been. Instead, I counted down the days until I could leave. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark checked in regularly. Sometimes, they would slip me a little extra cash, telling me to use it for my escape fund. Other times, they would take me out for coffee or lunch just to remind me that someone cared. That support made all the difference. But my parents had no idea. They were still too busy spoiling Jacob rotten. While I was quietly applying to colleges out of state, they were planning a surprise trip to Europe for his 16th birthday. While I was saving every penny from my part-time job, they were buying him yet another gaming console. I didn't say anything. Because soon none of it would matter. Soon, I would be gone. The letter arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I held the envelope in my trembling hands, heart pounding. I had applied to several colleges, but this one, Harrison University, was my dream school. It was far away, had a strong arts program, and best of all, it meant freedom. I took a deep breath and tore it open. "Dear Miss Evans, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into our fall semester." I didn't even finish reading. Tears welled up in my eyes. I had done it. I was getting out. I wasn't expecting congratulations. I wasn't expecting tears of pride or a celebratory dinner, but I still hoped, stupidly, that my parents would at least acknowledge it, that maybe for once they would be happy for me. So that night at dinner, I took a deep breath and said, I got into Harrison University. Silence. For a second, I thought maybe they hadn't heard me. Then my mother let out a bored sigh. And how are you planning to pay for that? My father barely looked up from his plate. Out-of-state tuition is expensive, Sophia. You know we can't afford that. Jacob snorted. Wait, you actually think Mom and Dad are going to pay for you to go across the country? Good luck with that. My heart sank. Of course they wouldn't help me. They had never helped me. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. I got a scholarship and I've been saving up. That caught my father's attention. He narrowed his eyes. Saving up? Where'd you get the money? I hesitated. If I told them Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark had been helping me, they might cut me off completely, so I lied. I've been working, I said simply. My mother shrugged. Well, if you want to waste your money on that, fine. Just don't come crying to us when it doesn't work out. That was it. No congratulations, no pride, no support, just dismissal. I clenched my fists under the table. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break, so I just nodded and said, okay. For the next few months, I packed in secret. I stored my essentials in garbage bags so my parents wouldn't notice. I sold some of my old things to make extra money. I avoided Jacob as much as possible. I stopped speaking to my parents unless necessary, and I counted down the days, until finally, it was time. I had planned to leave quietly. No goodbyes, no last-minute arguments, just walk out and never look back. Uncle Mark had agreed to pick me up early in the morning before my parents woke up, but Jacob ruined everything. I was tiptoeing down the stairs when Jacob's door swung open. He stood there, rubbing his eyes, then frowned when he saw my bags. Where the hell are you going? I froze. None of your business, I said, trying to push past him, but Jacob blocked my way. Wait, are you seriously leaving? Like, for good? I didn't answer. He let out a mocking laugh. Wow, you're actually running away. That's pathetic. I gritted my teeth. It's college, Jacob, not running away. Yeah, whatever, he scoffed. Then his smirk widened. You know Mom and Dad don't care, right? You think leaving is going to make them miss you? That stung, but I refused to let him see it. Instead, I forced a smile. I know they won't miss me, I said, and that's exactly why I'm leaving. Jacob's smirk faltered, but before he could say anything else, I pushed past him and walked out the front door. Uncle Mark was waiting outside. He grabbed my bags without a word and loaded them into the car. I climbed into the passenger seat, my heart hammering. As we pulled away, I turned back one last time. But little did I know that my uncle and aunt would not let this slide. As we drove away, I thought it was over. I thought I had finally escaped, but I had no idea what was coming next. Because while I had resigned myself to the way my parents treated me, Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark had not, and they were about to do something that would change everything. A week after I left, Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark made an announcement to the extended family. They were hosting a gathering at their house, one that included everyone. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, even my parents, unaware of what was coming, gladly accepted. They had spent years curating their reputation, playing the part of the loving, respectable couple. They were always admired at these gatherings, praised for their wonderful family. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. When my parents arrived at my aunt and uncle's house, they were greeted with silence. Normally, they were the center of attention, laughing and boasting about Jacob's latest achievements. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There were no polite smiles, no friendly small talk, just cold stares. Jacob, sensing the shift, frowned. Why is everyone acting weird? Then Aunt Linda stood up, and the room went silent. I think it's time we have an honest conversation, she said, her voice sharp. My mother, still clueless, smiled politely. Oh, about what? Aunt Linda turned toward them. About Sophia. The moment my name was mentioned, I saw my parents tense, my father's jaw clenched, my mother's fake smile faltered. Where is she, by the way? One of my cousins asked. She's not coming, Uncle Mark answered, because she doesn't live there anymore. Gasps echoed around the room. My grandmother, who had always assumed things were normal in our house, looked shocked. She left? Why? I could feel my parents' panic as the walls started closing in. She went off to college, my father said stiffly. That's all. But Aunt Linda wasn't going to let them twist the story. That's not all, she said, her voice sharp. She left because she had no choice, because you spent years treating her like she was nothing. The room fell silent. Then Aunt Linda took a deep breath and laid it all out. Every cruel thing my parents had done. How they had forced me to give up my bedroom so Jacob could have a gaming room. How they shoved me into the attic without a second thought. How they threw away my belongings like trash. How every birthday, every Christmas, every special occasion, Jacob got everything while I got nothing. How they never supported me, never celebrated me, never acted like I was part of the family. And finally, how they let me walk away without even trying to stop me. By the time she finished, the room was deathly quiet. Then my grandfather, a stern but fair man, turned to my parents. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father's face was bright red, his fists clenched. Jacob looked like he wanted to vanish. "I can't believe this," my grandmother whispered. "You what?" one of my aunts snapped. "You actually put your own daughter in an attic so your son could have a gaming room?" "It wasn't like that," my father muttered. "Oh, really?" Aunt Linda challenged. "Then how was it?" my mother finally snapped. "Sophia was always difficult. She was distant, she never tried to be part of the family, and—" "She didn't try?" Uncle Mark cut her off, furious. "Or did you make her feel like she wasn't allowed to?" My father slammed his hand on the table. "This is none of your business." "It's all of our business," my grandfather said coldly. "You're supposed to protect your children, all of them, not just the one you like best." The weight of judgment pressed down on my parents. They had always thrived on being respected, on being seen as the perfect family. But now they were exposed. Now everyone saw the truth, and they couldn't handle it. Jacob, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly stood up. "This is ridiculous," he scoffed. "Everyone's acting like this is some huge crime. Who cares? Sophia left, didn't she? She's fine. What's the big deal?" He was still trying to minimize it, but for the first time, my parents couldn't protect him. Because everyone in that room saw exactly what he was, spoiled, selfish, and completely undeserving of everything he had been given. The meeting ended with my parents humiliated. They stormed out, dragging Jacob behind them, furious that their perfect image had been shattered. But the damage was already done. For the first time, the family knew the truth. And from that day on, they were never looked at the same way again. I thought this was the end, that they would leave me alone, that I was finally free. It had been a year since I cut off my parents, a year since I walked away and built a life of my own, and it was the best decision I had ever made. For the first time in my life, I had freedom. I was thriving in college, working part-time, and even saving money for my own apartment. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark had become the family I never had, always checking in, always reminding me that I mattered. I had real friends. I was no longer the invisible girl in the attic. I was someone. And most importantly, I was finally happy. I hadn't heard from my parents in months, and I didn't miss them. I thought I was done with all of it, until one night my phone rang, and I saw Jacob's name on the screen. I hesitated. For a long time I just stared at the screen. Then, against my better judgment, I answered, "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, then a voice, quiet, hesitant. "Sophia?" It didn't sound like the Jacob I knew, not the smug, arrogant golden child, not the spoiled brother who had spent years ignoring my pain. He sounded small. He paused, then sighed. "I didn't think you'd pick up." I didn't say anything, waiting, and then he said something I never expected. "I'm sorry." I stayed silent, gripping the phone tightly. I had waited years to hear those words from him, but I didn't know if I could trust them. Jacob let out a shaky breath. I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything. His voice cracked. "I don't know who else to talk to." Something in my chest twisted, because for the first time in his life, Jacob sounded broken. Jacob had always been their favorite, the one they spoiled, the one they praised, the one they built a gaming room for while I was shoved into an attic. But I had been gone for a year, and Jacob had finally grown up. I took a deep breath. "What happened?" He hesitated. Then finally he said it. "They don't care about me either." I felt a cold chill run through me. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. Jacob let out a hollow laugh. "You were right. The second I stopped being useful to them, I stopped mattering." Jacob had flunked out of his first semester of college. The school had threatened to revoke his scholarship, and when my parents found out, they were furious. They yelled, berated him, told him he was a failure. For the first time, Jacob saw it. The love they had given him was conditional. He had always been the golden child, but only because he made them look good. Now that he wasn't perfect, they didn't want him either. "They act like I'm an embarrassment now," Jacob admitted. "They won't even talk to me unless it's to yell at me." I clenched my jaw. Oh, how the tables had turned. "I didn't know how bad it was, Sophia," he whispered. His voice broke. "I didn't see what they did to you. I didn't care. And now I get it." For a long moment, I didn't say anything, because I had waited for this. I had waited for him to see it, to finally understand what I went through. But hearing him now, so lost and broken, I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt tired. I don't know what to do, Jacob admitted. I can't help you, I said honestly. I expected him to get angry, but he didn't. I know, he said softly. Then after a pause, he asked, "Can I still be your brother?" And I realized this wasn't just about our parents. This was about us, the siblings we could have been, the bond we had never had. And the question I had to answer now was, did I even want that? Jacob's voice hung in the air, uncertain. Can I still be your brother? I didn't know how to answer. For years, he had been part of the reason I felt worthless. He had stood by while I was treated like a second-class family member. He had laughed when I was given nothing for Christmas while he was showered with gifts. He had enjoyed every bit of the privilege he was given while I was forced to the attic. And now that he had fallen from grace, he wanted a relationship. A part of me wanted to say no, to tell him he made his choice years ago. But another part of me, when I had spent years trying to silence, felt sorry for him because I had always wished we could have been real siblings. And for the first time, he wished that too. "Why now?" I finally asked. Jacob sighed. "Because I'm alone." He paused, then said quietly, "I didn't realize how much you went through. I was so caught up in everything they gave me. But now that they've turned on me, now that I know what it feels like to be treated like a disappointment." His voice trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew exactly what he meant. Now that he was suffering, he finally understood what they had done to me. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he whispered. "I should have stood up for you. I should have seen it." I closed my eyes. I had spent years hating him, resenting him, but now, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, listening to his voice, so different from the smug brother I once knew, I felt something I never expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, but sadness. Because the truth was, I had wanted a brother. I had wanted someone to care about me. And maybe, if things had been different, Jacob and I could have actually been close, but was it too late for that? "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. Jacob swallowed hard. "I get that. But," I hesitated, "I don't hate you." He let out a shaky breath. "That's more than I deserve." I rubbed my temples. "Look, Jacob, I can't just forget everything that happened, but if you're serious about trying to fix things, then maybe we can talk." He exhaled slowly, like he had been holding his breath. "Okay," he said, "I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, Jacob and I talked more, slowly, cautiously. It was awkward at first, both of us trying to navigate a relationship that had never truly existed. But for the first time, he was making an effort. He asked about my life, my classes, my friends. He even apologized again, not just for our parents, but for himself. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't instant forgiveness, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Then one day, Jacob asked a question that made my stomach drop. "Have you heard from Mom and Dad?" I tensed. "No, and I don't plan to." He sighed. "They know we've been talking." I frowned. "How?" Jacob hesitated. They saw my call logs. They asked me about it." My heart pounded. "And?" "They weren't happy," he admitted. "Mom said you're poisoning me against them. Dad told me to stop wasting my time on you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course they did." Jacob was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made my heart ache. "I told them to go to hell." I blinked. "You, what?" Jacob exhaled sharply. "I told them they had no right to say that after everything they did to you. I told them I wasn't going to be their puppet anymore." I was speechless. For years, Jacob had been their golden child. He had never stood up to them, and now he was choosing me over them. "I don't think I can go back," he admitted. "I don't want to live in that house anymore, not after knowing what they did to you." I took a deep breath. "Then don't," I said simply. Jacob hesitated. "But where do I go?" I knew what he was really asking. He had no one else. He had burned bridges with the rest of the family. And now I was the only person who still cared. I had spent years dreaming of the moment Jacob would understand my pain, but I had never imagined he would need me in the end. So now I had a decision to make. Could I let him into my life for real this time? Could I let go of the past and be the sister I always wished he had been to me? Or was it too late for that? Jacob's voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "But where do I go?" I didn't answer right away. For so long I had been the one without a place to belong. Now, Jacob, the golden child, the favorite, the one who had always had everything, was in that position, and he was asking me for help. The irony wasn't lost on me, but even as the weight of it settled in, I felt something I wasn't expecting. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but hesitation. Because if I let him in, if I gave him a place to stay, a second chance, a relationship, I wasn't just helping him, I was risking getting hurt again. That night I called Aunt Linda. I told her everything, how Jacob had finally realized the truth, how he had stood up to our parents, how he had nowhere else to go. She listened carefully, then sighed. "You don't owe him anything, Sophia," she said gently. "But I can tell you want to help him." I hesitated. "I don't know if I can trust him." She was quiet for a moment. "Then don't trust his words," she said. "Trust his actions." The next morning I called Jacob. "I'm not just going to let you move in with me," I said bluntly, "but I'll help you, on my terms." Jacob didn't hesitate. "Okay. You need to find a job," I said. "Something stable. And if you want a place to stay, we'll figure something out. But you have to prove to me that this is real." For the first time in his life, he didn't argue. "I will," he said. "I promise." Jacob kept his word. For weeks, he hunted for jobs. He stayed with friends when he could, sometimes sleeping in his car, and he never once asked for a handout. Then, one night, he called me. His voice was shaky. "Mom and Dad, they kicked me out for good." A heavy silence settled between us. "What happened?" I asked. He exhaled sharply. "Dad told me I had two options, come home and to fix things with them, or leave and never come back." I clenched my jaw. "And?" "I left." I swallowed. "Where are you now?" "Nowhere," he admitted, "and I'm trying not to panic." I had a decision to make. I could walk away, tell him this wasn't my problem, tell him this was exactly what he deserved after years of benefiting from our parents' favoritism, or I could finally let go of the past and choose to move forward. Not forget, not erase what happened, but maybe start something new. I let out a slow breath. Then I said, "Come over." When Jacob showed up at my door, he looked nothing like the brother I remembered. He looked tired, lost, like someone who had finally learned that life wouldn't always give him everything. I let him in. And for the first time, we sat in the same room, not as rivals, not as enemies, but as two people trying to figure out if family was something we could rebuild. And maybe, just maybe it was. Because my parents, they weren't done. And the moment they realized that Jacob had chosen me over them, they would do everything in their power to pull him back. And I wasn't sure if he was strong enough to resist. Not yet. After we walked out of that diner, Jacob and I didn't speak for a while. We just kept walking, side by side, both of us trying to process what had just happened. He had finally cut them off. For the first time in his life, he was free. The first big test came at Thanksgiving. For years, Jacob had been the center of attention at every family holiday. He was used to the lavish dinners, the gifts, the endless praise. But now we weren't invited. He didn't say anything about it, but I could tell it stung. So Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark stepped in. They invited us over, cooked an entire feast, treated Jacob like he had always been welcome. And when dinner was over, Jacob, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke. "I don't think I ever said it," he said, looking at Linda and Mark. "But thank you for looking out for Sophia, for noticing what our parents were doing when no one else did." Aunt Linda squeezed his hand. "You're family, Jacob, and you always will be." Jacob swallowed hard, blinking quickly. Then he looked at me. "I guess that goes for you too," he said awkwardly, "if you still want a brother." I studied him for a long moment. Then, for the first time in years, I smiled at him. "Yeah," I said, "I think I do." Jacob wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But we were learning how to live without them, learning how to support each other, learning how to be siblings. And for the first time, when I looked at Jacob, I didn't see my parents' golden child. I just saw my brother. And that was enough.